She was 20 years old when the town of Larkspur Bend decided her father's name was no longer worth trusting, and it took her the better part of 2 years, and a ruined customs house nobody else wanted, to prove them wrong. We want to tell you about her tonight, about a young woman named Josephine Teller, and about a sealed vault inside an abandoned customs house on the old river landing, and about the ledger she found inside it that put her father's name back where it belonged. Settle in with us, and before we go any further, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight, because we like to picture all of you out there listening together, in all your different corners of the world. Stay close through this one. It moves slow at first, the way the true ones always do, and it earns what it gives you. And if these long, quiet frontier stories are the kind you come back for, we'd be glad to have you subscribe before we go on, so the next one finds you when it's ready. Josephine Teller was born in Larkspur Bend, a river town of some 600 souls, where the old Wagon road met a wide, slow bend of water deep enough, in those years, for shallow draft steamers to load and unload freight bound upriver toward the territorial capital. Her father, a man named Amos Teller, had served for 11 years as the town's customs inspector, the man responsible for weighing and recording every barrel and crate that passed through the river landing, assessing the small tariffs the territorial government levied on certain goods, and keeping the accounts that reconciled what came off the boats against what the merchants of Larkspur Bend claimed to have received. It was not a position that made a man rich, but it was a position that made a man trusted. And for 11 years Amos Teller had been, by every account Josephine ever heard as a girl, the most trusted man on the river landing. Her mother had died bringing Josephine into the world, and Amos Teller raised his daughter alone in a small frame house 2 streets back from the landing, and he raised her, as it happened, very much the way he ran his ledgers, with a plain, steady insistence that things be counted honestly and recorded exactly as they stood. He taught her sums before she was 6. He taught her, by the time she was 12, to read a bill of lading and catch a discrepancy in the tally of barrels against crates. He took her down to the customs house some Saturdays, when the work was light, and let her sit at the small side desk while he worked, and told her once, in the plain way he said most things, that a man's name was the only ledger that truly mattered in the end, and that it ought to be kept as carefully as any other. In the winter of Josephine's 18th year, a flatboat carrying a shipment of tanned hides bound for the territorial capital went down in a storm 11 miles upriver, a total loss, and the merchant who had consigned the hides, a man named Virgil Kess, filed a claim against the customs office, asserting that Amos Teller's own tally sheets, made at the time the hides were loaded onto the flatboat at Larkspur Bend, showed a count nearly a third higher than what the insurers upriver were willing to honor without dispute. Virgil Kess argued, loudly and to anyone in town who would listen, that Amos Teller had either miscounted through simple incompetence, or had, worse, colluded in some fashion to inflate the tally for reasons of his own, and the territorial customs office, eager to close the matter quietly and unwilling to take the word of a small-town inspector over a well-connected river merchant, suspended Amos Teller from his position pending an inquiry that dragged on, unresolved, for the better part of a year. Amos Teller never wavered in his account. He had counted the hides himself, twice, the way he counted everything twice, and he told anyone who asked that the tally stood exactly as he had recorded it. But suspicion, once it settles over a man in a small town, does not need proof to do its damage, and within a season the customers who had once nodded to him on the street began, in small ways, to look past him instead. And the merchants who had once trusted his tallies without question began asking, quietly, whether perhaps a fresh set of eyes ought to review the landing's books going forward. Amos Teller died in the spring of Josephine's 19th year, of a heart that simply stopped one evening at his own kitchen table, with the inquiry into his name still unresolved, and Josephine buried her father believing, with a certainty she never once let herself doubt, that whatever had gone wrong with Virgil Kess's hides, it was not the fault of the man who had taught her to keep a ledger straight to the penny. The Territorial Customs Office, in the wake of Amos Teller's death, quietly closed the inquiry without ever issuing a formal finding either way, which meant in practical terms that the town of Larkspur Bend was left free to believe whatever it preferred to believe, and what it largely preferred to believe, in the absence of any clear vindication, was the version that let Virgil Kess keep his standing as a wronged man rather than a mistaken one. Josephine, left alone in the small frame house, with no income beyond what she could earn taking in mending and keeping accounts for two of the smaller landing merchants, who still trusted her enough to hire her, watched her father's name settle slowly into the kind of quiet disgrace that no one in town ever said aloud, but that everyone somehow understood. The old customs house itself, the building where Amos Teller had kept his tallies for 11 years, had been abandoned within months of his suspension. The territorial office electing to route what little formal customs work Larkspur Bend still required through a clerk 2 towns downriver rather than fund a new local inspector. And the building sat empty on the landing, its windows boarding over one by one as the glass broke and nobody troubled to replace it, its small stone vault room at the rear, where the office had once stored bonded goods awaiting tariff payment, sealed behind a heavy iron door that nobody in town had the key to open, since the key had, by all accounts, gone down with Amos Teller himself, or been lost, or simply misplaced in the confusion of his sudden death. Josephine walked past the old customs house nearly every day of the 2 years that followed, on her way to deliver mending or collect a merchant's accounts, and she never once, in all that time, let herself go inside. It was, she told herself, simply an old building now, of no more consequence to her than any other empty structure on the landing. But we think, and we suspect you'll come to think too, that some part of her walked past it every day precisely because some part of her could not yet bear to. In the spring of Josephine's 20th year, the Territorial Land Office announced that the old customs house, having sat unclaimed and untaxed for 2 full years, would be offered at public auction to settle back assessments, the building and its small parcel of land to go to whatever bid the county assessor judged sufficient to cover what was owed. Word of the auction spread through Larkspur Bend the way word of anything spreads through a town of 600 people, which is to say quickly, and with a good deal of commentary attached. And the general opinion around the landing was that the building, ruined as it had become, structurally sound but stripped of its fixtures and half its roof shakes gone soft with 2 winters of neglect, was worth very little to anyone beyond whatever scrap lumber a buyer might salvage from it. Josephine had, by that spring, saved a little over $11 from 2 years of mending and bookkeeping, kept in a tin box beneath a loose board in her bedroom floor, and on the morning of the auction she walked down to the landing with that $11 folded into her coat pocket, telling herself she was only going to watch, the way half the town seemed to be turning out to watch, more out of curiosity than any intention to bid. The auction was conducted by the county assessor himself, a heavy-set man named Dobbs, standing on the customs house's own front step with a small crowd gathered below him in the spring mud, and when the bidding opened at $4, offered by a merchant who clearly wanted the lumber and nothing more, Josephine surprised herself, and everyone standing near her, by raising her hand and saying $5. A ripple of low laughter went through the crowd, not unkind exactly, but the particular kind of laughter a small town saves for a young woman doing something it does not expect of her. And the merchant who had opened the bidding raised it to 6, without much interest, clearly assuming the girl would not go higher. Josephine said 7. Someone near the back of the crowd said, loud enough to carry, that Amos Teller's daughter meant to buy back her own father's ruin, and there was more laughter at that, though quieter this time, and Josephine felt her face go hot, but did not lower her hand. The bidding climbed slowly, in dollar increments, as the crowd's amusement turned gradually into something more like interest, and when it reached $10, the merchant who had started it all shook his head and stepped back, muttering that he had no interest in paying more than the lumber was worth just to watch a girl make a point. Josephine said 11, the whole of what she had, and Dobbs the assessor, seeing no further bids offered, brought his gavel down and pronounced the old customs house and its parcels sold to Miss Josephine Teller for $11 even. And the crowd, whatever it had thought of the spectacle, applauded in the loose, scattered way crowds do when something has ended more interestingly than they expected. And Josephine walked home that afternoon owning, for the first time in her life, a piece of ground and a ruined building standing on it, and having, for the first time in 2 years, spent every last cent she had to her name. She began clearing the building the following week, alone at first, sweeping out 2 years of blown leaves and broken glass, prying loose the rotted roof shakes and setting them aside for burning, and it was on the 9th day of this work, prying open a warped side door that had swollen shut with damp, that she found her way at last into the small stone vault room at the rear of the building, its heavy iron door, she discovered. Not locked at all, but simply stuck fast on rusted hinges that had not turned in 2 years, and which gave way, with considerable effort and a shower of rust flakes, to her shoulder and a pry bar borrowed from a neighbor. Inside, the vault room was dry, cool, and undisturbed, exactly as Amos Teller must have left it the day the inquiry began. A row of shelves along one wall held bonded goods long since forgotten by whatever merchants had once consigned them. A few bolts of cloth gone brittle with age, some crates of hardware, but it was the small iron strongbox bolted to the floor beneath the shelves that stopped Josephine's breath. Because it was exactly the strongbox she remembered from her Saturday visits as a girl. The one her father had always kept the day's completed tallies locked inside until they could be transferred to the territorial office, and which everyone, in the confusion following his death and the inquiry that followed it, had simply assumed had been emptied and removed along with everything else of value from the customs house, since no one had thought to look for it in a vault room whose door appeared, from the outside, rusted permanently shut. Josephine did not have a key to the strongbox any more than she had had one to the vault door, but 2 years of watching her father work had taught her more about the mechanics of locks and hasps than most young women of her circumstance would ever have occasion to learn. And with the same pry bar and the better part of an hour's patient work, she worked the strongbox open. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the damp, was her father's own private ledger, separate from the official customs tallies, the ledger Amos Teller had always kept, as Josephine now remembered him explaining to her once, as a personal check against his own official work, a habit born of the same insistence on double counting that he had drilled into her since childhood. And there, in her father's own careful hand, dated the exact week of the flatboat's loading, was a complete second tally of the tanned hides consigned by Virgil Kess, cross-checked line by line against the loading manifest, and beside it, in the margin, a note in Amos Teller's hand recording that he had personally observed Virgil Kess's own hired hands loading a final unlogged shipment of 11 additional hide bales onto the flatboat after the official tally had already been recorded and sealed, bales that Virgil Kess had apparently added at the last moment without troubling to have them properly counted into the customs record, and which would explain, precisely and to the barrel, the discrepancy the insurers upriver had refused to honor. Beneath the ledger, at the bottom of the strongbox, lay a second document, a signed statement from a dockhand named Elias Rourke, dated the same week, attesting under his own hand that he had personally helped load those 11 unlogged bales at Virgil Kess's direct instruction, and had been told by Kess himself not to trouble the inspector's office with the extra count since it would only slow the boat's departure. Amos Teller, it seemed, had gathered this evidence quietly in the weeks after the flatboat went down, meaning to present it formally to the territorial inquiry once he had it fully in order, and had died, with the inquiry still open and his own vindication still unfinished, before he ever had the chance. We want to say plainly that Josephine Teller did not rush this discovery any more than her father would have. She sat a long while in the cool stone vault room, with the ledger open on her knee, reading her father's careful entries by the light coming through the warped side door. And she thought of him teaching her sums before she was 6, and telling her that a man's name was the only ledger that truly mattered. And she understood, sitting there, that he had spent the last months of his life trying, in the only way he knew how, to keep that ledger straight, and had simply run out of time. The following week, Josephine carried the ledger and Elias Rourke's signed statement to the county courthouse, 2 towns downriver, where she presented them to a young territorial magistrate named Corliss Bain, 28 years old, and new enough to his post to still take an interest in matters the older officials had grown comfortable leaving unresolved. Magistrate Bain reviewed the documents carefully over several days, located Elias Rourke himself, still working the river landing at Larkspur Bend and willing, once approached directly, to confirm under oath what he had signed 2 years before, and in due course issued a formal finding that reopened the long-dormant inquiry and cleared Amos Teller's name entirely, placing the discrepancy in the hide tally squarely where the evidence showed it belonged, with Virgil Kess's own unlogged shipment rather than any error or misconduct on the part of the customs inspector. Virgil Kess, for his part, was made to answer for the false claim he had filed against the insurers upriver, and though the town of Larkspur Bend never saw fit to run him out entirely, his standing at the landing, we can tell you, was never again quite what it had been, and more than a few of the merchants who had once nodded past Josephine Teller in the street found reason, in the months that followed, to nod at her directly instead. Josephine did not sell the old customs house, though more than one merchant approached her about it once its story became known up and down the river. She had it repaired instead, the roof reshaked, the windows reglazed, the vault room's heavy door rehung true on new hinges, and she opened it, once the work was done, not as a customs office again, since the territorial government had long since routed that business elsewhere, but as a small public accounting office, where any merchant or family in Larkspur Bend who needed a ledger kept honestly, or a tally double-checked, or simply a fair set of eyes on a dispute they could not settle themselves, could come and find help at a price anyone in town could afford. She hung, above the vault room door, a small brass plaque bearing her father's name and the words, "honest to the penny," the same phrase he had used to describe good bookkeeping to her since she was old enough to hold a pen. She trained, over the years that followed, 3 young clerks of her own. Each of them, as it happened, girls from families the town had not always troubled to take seriously, and she paid each of them fairly from their very first week, and told each of them, in words she had turned over a long time before she found the courage to say them the first time, that a name kept honest was worth more than any fortune a person could inherit, and worth protecting with the same patience her own father had taught her to bring to any ledger. however long it took. Magistrate Corliss Bain, who went on to a long career in territorial law, used to say in later years that the reopening of the Teller inquiry was the case that taught him the most about patience, not his own, but a daughter's, and that he had never forgotten the sight of a 20-year-old woman laying 2 years of careful, quiet evidence on his desk, without once raising her voice to insist on being believed. On quiet evenings, Josephine still sits sometimes at the small side desk in the vault room. The same desk where she once sat as a girl on her father's Saturday visits, and she keeps, in the top drawer, her father's original ledger beside Elias Rourke's signed statement, and she adds to a single sheet of paper tucked behind them. From time to time, whatever new small kindness or new small correction the accounting office's work has brought into someone else's life that week. Because she came to believe, sitting in that stone room with her father's careful hand open on her knee, that a name kept honestly is a ledger that never quite closes, and is worth tending for exactly that reason. Josephine Teller was 20 years old when Larkspur Bend decided her father's name could no longer be trusted. And she was not yet 22 when she proved, one careful entry at a time, that it never should have been doubted at all. If this one sat with you the way we hope it did, we'd be glad if you left it a like before you go, and told us in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether there's a name in your own family that once needed someone patient enough to set it right. We'll be back soon with another story from this same quiet country. Until next time, stay close.